I got to my phone just in time. Trying to unlock it with wet fingers wasn't the most pleasant thing to do, and I did it before it went off. Sorry, honey, I was in the shower. I'm all slippery and wet. Damn, I thought you were saving yourself for me when I got home tomorrow night. Who made you so slippery and wet for a millisecond? My pulse jumped before his mouth quickly turned into a beautiful smile that told me he loved me stupidly. I was in the shower. You called 5 minutes early. I'm still soapy and have conditioner in my hair. He let out his sexy chuckle, his teeth flashing white as he slowly shook his head. We have a little problem, so everyone's busy on the platform. I need to fill in, so I'll call earlier. His smile faded. Why did he pause in his sentence? That alarmed me. He regained his composure and his smile returned, at least partially. I suddenly wondered if he saw something here that might give it away. Jimmy, are you okay? You look like you've had a sudden realization. I'm sorry, Jade. Something important has come up. I have to go, weather permitting. The helicopter should be here tomorrow morning. It's like these 3 weeks are getting longer, and the 2 weeks you'll be home seem short. I want you back in our bed so badly. Just tell Jade, and I'll drop everything. Money doesn't matter, but we do. I've been saying this for 5 years. If you want me to get a job on land, and not on those gas rigs in the North Sea, don't be afraid to ask for what you want. This job means a lot to you, and the money is good. I love you, Jimmy, and I promise we'll make up for 3 weeks of missed fun. I love you, Jimmy. I'm serious, Jade. I'd rather get a job at the grocery store than lose what we have. I loved you, Jade. I'm sorry I have to go. I felt uncomfortable, like he'd said he loved me rather than I loved him. I must be getting paranoid, but something was bothering him. Like something had happened during the video call that made him change. I looked around. There was nothing to give me away. I'd been so careful to cover my tracks and make sure everything looked normal. My special time was carefully planned so as not to arouse suspicion. On Friday nights, I would go out with the girls and be a model wife, never dancing with any of the men who were always hitting on us at the club. I'd get back in a cab with Jimmy's sister Beth, who'd drop me off first, and then I'd ring the doorbell, knowing that his security camera would signal him that I was home. I'd get up, throw my coat off my shoulders, and kiss him on the doorbell camera, knowing he'd watch it later. I had never given him, or anyone else, the slightest reason to doubt that I was anything but a faithful wife who spent one evening a week with her girlfriends while my husband traveled. The perils of the North Sea to maintain our fantasy life. I removed a new set of electric-colored underwear from a hook on the bedroom door. Still in its packaging, it was attached to a cardboard two-dimensional detail of a torso, so as to show how it was all attached to each other, full of different clamps. It essentially formed a harness, add to that pale blue stockings and a thong to match, and I could see that I was sexy as hell. I shuddered at the thought of having to show it to Dan, and up close and personal. Our dates were quick and lusty, with no foreplay, dinners, dances, or the subtleties of seduction that are part of a typical relationship. If you think of my marriage to Jimmy as typical, it had been the same for the past 18 months. Jimmy would go to work on Fridays. I would pack and drive to the club at least an hour before the other girls. As soon as the cab dropped me off at the club, I would enter through the back service entrance. My body knew what to expect, and my skimpy underwear was always damp and sticky. Before I reached Dan's office, I'd go in, close the door, and Dan would relieve me of everything I was wearing. He insisted that I wear at least some underwear, and over the course of our dates my collection had grown considerably, so much so that I had to box up most of it and hide it in the depths of our large mirrored built-in closet. Dan would get up and walk around me, devouring me with his eyes, with the look of a hungry wolf at 59, 175 centimeters in heels, possessing what Jimmy said was a perfect body and gorgeous long red hair. I knew I had it. Dan wanted it, and he took it. There was no love in it, just a release for both of us. He told me how dirty I was. All the humiliation and insults only increased my sexual pleasure and release each time he came, and this happened more than once during our brief encounters. As soon as he was done, I would go to the bathroom to clean up, change into fresh, normal underwear, stuff the soiled underwear into my purse, and then go out the back door and to the front of the club to join my not-so-bright friends, including my sister-in-law. They all thought I had just arrived, not realizing I had been on top of them for at least an hour, trading my body and soul for narcotic pleasure. Everything repeated itself in the same format as every Friday night. Some wine, a few cocktails, lots of conversation, laughter. We danced together, and some danced with random male partners, but not with me. I always said no, and when they were a little more persistent, I would raise my hand and shake my wedding ring. But that was secondary. Dan had told me in the beginning that if I danced with another man in the club just once, I could forget about coming to his club. I needed the sensations he was giving me, something I couldn't and wouldn't ask my husband for, so I tried to honor his request. After a fun night, I drove home with Beth, my sister-in-law, and we giggled and chatted. After she dropped me off, I walked up to the driveway and rang the doorbell, looking up at him. I leaned forward and kissed the air as sexily as I could, telling Jimmy I missed him before opening the door and walking in sometime during the night. He saw this and sent me a little emoji kiss on WhatsApp in return. When I woke up in the morning, I saw that he had written me a message, but it wasn't quite what I expected. It just said that there was a problem, and he was running late, but he would be home on Monday. I started to worry. Did he really know something, but how? He had never been to the club, so there was no way he could have set up a camera there. Dan advised me to always linger and look in my purse for a few minutes before entering the club, but to look around. Did the car pull into the parking lot after the taxi? Are there no cars in the parking lot from which someone is watching me? If for some reason I thought I was being followed, I had to enter the club through the front door. Of course, I didn't miss anything and chalked it up to a malfunction in the rig. It had happened before, but I felt uneasy. Saturday morning I washed new underwear, because anything I wore for Dan was guaranteed to be stained. The night before Dan had me in the middle of the morning at the end of our game, I got a text from Beth on my phone. Jimmy had texted her that he wasn't going to make it back in time and asked if she would take me shopping on Sunday. Her husband Stan was playing golf that day, so we took the train to London and did just that. I was excited that he was due home the following evening, but saddened when I got a text message in the middle of the day saying he wouldn't be home until Tuesday. There were no emoticons in the message, just text, which was uncharacteristic of our communication these days. I immediately replied with a sad face, a kiss, and a couple of hearts and waited. Nothing came back. I called him, but the call went straight to voicemail. A few minutes later, Beth's phone beeped to let me know that a message had arrived, and when she read it, I was sure her eyes rolled, and she looked at me for a moment before she typed a reply and put the phone back in her purse. She looked up at me and smiled, but somehow not in the same way. They can't know. I'm covering my tracks, and the evidence just isn't there. But I still felt uneasy. I asked her, "Is there something important?" She literally looked me right in the eye. It was Stan. Apparently, one of his friends had just found out that his wife was cheating on him. I felt my heart jump in my throat. She seemed to be looking right into my soul. "Oh, that's terrible. Do we know her?" She still looked into my soul and answered, "Yes, we both know him, but not her. She's a stranger to us." I felt uncomfortable. I wanted to ask her something else, but I thought it would be better to keep quiet. On Monday and Tuesday, I cleaned the house again. My new dirty laundry was now clean and dry and joined the large collection I had accumulated over the past 18 months. I began to think that it would be wise to sort through it and get rid of some of it, but the idea hurt me because it wasn't all cheap and it wasn't meant for my husband. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I should start using some of it when he gets home. He said he should be home around 4:30, so I went to the gym at 12 o'clock to try to calm my mind before he got there after the first time I slept with Dan. I was sure I had the word guilty tattooed on my face, even though I was trying very hard to act natural when Jimmy got home, but Jimmy didn't say anything. This tattoo of my shameful act was just not visible to him. After realizing this, I realized that I would be safe if I followed simple rules. Act normal. Don't try to compensate. Don't say no to my husband. And my affair only happened in Dan's office during those girls' nights out. When I returned from the gym, I was shocked. Jimmy had already returned and was sitting on the terrace looking across the garden to Conbrough Castle. In the distance, I walked to the side to listen to the slight rustling of the trees and the birds singing. Jimmy was sitting there, not getting up to hug me, just turning his face to me with a blank expression and staring at the garden again. I felt my heart beat faster and a terrible knot formed in my stomach. "How long, Jade?" I hadn't expected such a question and tried to think quickly. There was nothing that could give me away or have a rational explanation. "Jimmy, what are you saying? What do you mean I'm having an affair?" He turned and looked at me, his face expressionless. I'd seen it before, when we sometimes got together with friends and family for an evening, the guys playing poker and us girls drinking and chatting. I stared at his best poker face. The silence continued, and I felt a tear roll down my cheek. "Jimmy, I didn't do anything." He stood up and picked up a box I hadn't noticed beside him and dumped its contents on the table. 18 months of worn underwear lay in a pile. He sat back down, turned around and looked at me with a blank face. I wanted to curse, but that would have given me away. I had to play his game. Put 2 and 2 together and you get 5. I missed you. It's not what it looks like. I get lonely when you're not around. So I started buying lingerie, and I liked to look at myself in the mirror. I wanted to make sure that I still looked sexy. Make sure you still wanted me. I was embarrassed by how much I bought, so I put it in a box in my closet. I thought you'd be mad at me for spending so much money, but you're wrong, Jade. I don't care how much you spent to show me how beautiful you are, but I'm not the one who's benefiting from what I now consider to be a tasteless pile of junk you've soiled. He lowered himself into another chair and pulled out a large brown manila envelope. It had a small bulge, which meant it wasn't empty. He placed it in front of him, then looked up at me with the same face and said nothing. I looked at the envelope and was gripped with fear. What had he received and how did he know? I needed a clue to at least try to limit the possible damage. His sister's comment about her husband's girlfriend led me to believe she was referring to my marriage when she said we didn't know this woman. She was referring to the other me, the one who had broken her wedding vows. I was in trouble. What's in the envelope? Honey, the truth, Jade, just the truth. Then you need to show me what's inside. I have nothing to hide. If you think I've done something wrong, something that's come between us, you're wrong. It's going to be a simple misunderstanding, trust me." He leaned over the table and started going through the things scattered on it, like he was putting on a little show. Then he found the blue underwear I'd worn on Friday. "Did he like seeing you in them?" On Friday, I jumped up from my chair, leaned over the railing that separated the terrace from the garden, and breathed dry for a few moments, shaking violently, tears streaming from my eyes. I racked my brain, wondering how he could have known, as I stood there thinking frantically. His voice brought me back to that moment and said 3 words that no partner in a relationship wants to hear. "We need to talk." I looked at him, and he nodded toward the chair across from me. I sat down and studied his face. There was no emotion on it. Just the same poker face I'd seen a few minutes ago when I came home and my world started to crumble one jade at a time. "Look at me. Okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you this envelope so you can have a copy of all the evidence of your infidelity, and you only get one chance. I want you to tell me the whole truth from the beginning. When it started, I didn't do anything. Jimmy, please believe me." I finally broke down and sobbed, barely breathing every time I looked at him. He just sat there and looked at me, impassive and emotionless. "Jay, I know this is hard for you. Let me explain. I want to hear it from you, your words from your mouth. I won't move from this chair and I promise I won't touch you." "Okay, but you have one chance. Jade, if you want to keep the act, I'm going to make sure that all of your family members, friends, former coworkers, neighbors, and even the couple who run the bar know the contents of this envelope. Take your time. I hope that if you are starting from scratch, you will leave no stone unturned. I can understand why, and I am trying to find a path to forgiveness." So, on June 20th, 2022, you, Jade Thomas, will tell your husband, Jimmy Thomas, the truth about your infidelity, without fear of violence or malice toward yourself. As they say, the word is yours. I felt tears streaming from my eyes. He was so calm and collected. He obviously knew, but I couldn't understand how the threat of being crushed by the contents of his envelope made me decide that I had to tell the whole truth, the whole sneaky truth, and hope that he would eventually forgive me and we could pick up the pieces. I began to cry uncontrollably and couldn't move. Apparently anticipating that I would struggle, he poured me a glass of ice water from a pitcher he had placed on the table. He went back into the kitchen and got a box of tissues. "I'm sorry, Jade. I knew you'd need water, but I didn't realize it would hit you so hard here. Take the tissues when you're ready to shoot." I tried my best to wipe my eyes, but I couldn't look at him directly, so I concentrated on the glass of water in front of me before I spoke. "First of all, Jimmy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I did it, and I'm sorry you found out and it hurt you. I wasn't actively looking for anyone. It just happened. It was a perfect storm in my life when you weren't there to help me." I heard him take a deep breath, and when I looked up, I saw his gaze harden as he exhaled through his nose. "I realized why I'm sorry, Jimmy. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just stating a fact. I was alone and things were going downhill. The first blow came when I was downsized. We had no idea that Co. was going to stop the world. If I had known, I wouldn't have jumped into the fledgling business. If everything had been normal, I would still be working there, but as you say, things happen. Then there was Co itself. Yes, the whole blockade was over, but it was so hard for me to be alone, especially without any real neighbors. Until you came home, I felt like a real prisoner, a bird in the gilded cage we call home, and things slowly went back to normal as things normalized. A lot of the girls couldn't go out for various reasons, So life was very low-key until that happened. It was that week when my car broke down and I was on my way to a job interview in Sheffield, and they basically said on the phone that the job was mine. But of course, I never showed up for the interview, and they gave the job to someone else, and the next day the washing machine broke down unexpectedly even though it was only 3 months old. On Friday, we went for a walk and the girls commented that I looked depressed, which of course I was. As we left and were almost home, I realized I had left my cell phone behind. Beth called and was answered by the owner of the club. The phone was given to the manager, and I could pick it up whenever I wanted. It was my only way to stay close to you while you were at work, so the cab took Beth home and I went back to the club to get my phone. They directed me upstairs to Dan's office, the club owner. I knocked and walked in, and he was sitting at his desk. He got up and walked over with my phone, and I started to apologize for leaving it behind. As he reached out to give it to me, I could smell his aftershave. It was yours and my favorite obsession. It made me think of you, and I burst into tears, putting my arms around his shoulders and sobbing heavily. He let me cry and put his hands on my back, gently running them up and down my sides. I needed that right then and there, and for the first time in my entire life with you, I let my emotional barrier crumble. I turned my head, and our eyes met, and the next moment we were kissing, and I realized what I was talking about. It hurt. I stopped and looked at Jimmy. He was sitting again with an emotionless expression on his face, so we have a plausible reason why you fell off your pedestal that time, but it continued with Jade until last Friday. Why did he blackmail you? They have some kind of power over you that made you come back. I need to understand why it was so clear that he knew almost everything. Somehow, he must have been warned or suspected. I had to assume that the envelope came from a private investigator, but I didn't know how far it went. I could tell you why, but it would hurt you, Jimmy. Are you sure? He gave a small expressionless nod to continue, and I continued from the moment in Dan's office that I described when he kissed me. His hand reached down and pulled up the hem of my dress, gripping my buttocks tightly. He pulled me to him. He began to lift me up, and I'm sorry. I lifted my legs and closed them behind him. I reached down and unbuttoned his pants. I looked at Jimmy. He had his eyes closed, and a single tear was rolling down his blank face. I started to cry hard, repeating the words of remorse over and over until I was practically hyperventilating. Was he a better man, Jade? Is that why you kept coming back? I guess you love him since you buy and share all this, Larry. I don't remember seeing that on you. I jumped up from my chair and tried to walk towards him to hug him, but Jimmy calmly raised his hand and stopped me, telling me to sit back down and finish telling the truth. I was a broken woman, and I was sure my husband was broken too, behind the facade he was creating. He wasn't better, but he was different, very different. You're loving, tender, you think, and you fulfill my sexual needs and desires, probably more than your own. It's slow and sensual, and I love the way we climax over time, all those years of sharing and exploring our bodies. I love you, Jimmy. I fought back tears. I meant it. I jumped out of my chair again, but this time I squeezed past his hand, clinging to him as my tears spilled onto his shirt. Normally his hands would be outstretched to comfort me, but today they were still resting on the arms of the chair. He spoke softly. Please, Jade, sit back down. This is the hardest part of the rest of our lives. Let's get through it. I have some questions, Jade. If you don't mind, I nodded as he began what looked like an inquisition. No, Jade, that wasn't the answer I wanted. How often did you finish during your session? I didn't want to answer, but he already knew the answer. At least a few times, I could barely speak between tears and sobs. Did you get dressed for him? I did. It was getting harder and harder to keep myself together. I wasn't even sure if he understood what I was saying through the constant sobbing, and I wanted him to stop every question, like a knife stabbing deeper into my heart. What have you given him, Jade? Did you give him the things you denied me? No, I didn't give them, but he took them and I let him. I sobbed uncontrollably again. I had just admitted that I had given my cherry to another man, and I was so embarrassed that he saw it and told me to drink some water and calm down as much as possible. A few minutes later, I was sitting up, shaking, but quite sane. He said a few more questions, and he would stop you like the sex. Jade, you kept going back to him, so it had to be better than what we were having. I told you he's just not like you, or loving, respectful, and he just takes me, and I don't know why, but it does something that I can't explain to myself deep inside. It's wrong, but I can't help it. Please treat me the same. Punish me, make me yours, not his. I couldn't hold back my tears again and felt like I wanted to ask Jade one last question. I nodded. Do you love him more than me? That was it. It pushed me to my limit, and I gasped until I passed out. When I came to, he took me in his arms and laid me down on the couch. On the arm of the couch was the dreaded manila envelope. I'm sorry, Jade, but we have to get this over with. Can you answer one last question? No, I don't love him at all. It was just an outlet. I don't know why or what made me go back to him. It was like a drug and like an addiction. I became addicted. I knew the consequences, like all addicts, but I couldn't stop, even though I kept telling myself for days that I had to stop. What's going to happen now, Jimmy? Please, I'm begging you. Don't leave me. We can work this out together. There must be a way out. Jade, thank you. That concludes this part of the interview. You can now pick up your copy that is in the envelope. I sat down and took the envelope with shaking hands, amazed at how light it was. When I opened it, inside was a small digital voice recorder. If you press the small button on the left, Jade, it will stop recording. I did so and examined the device. It confused me, and my mind began to reorganize my thoughts. He had nothing but this little device I was holding, but of course he knew, and that was the problem. My husband knew that I had just admitted that I had betrayed him, and in the worst possible way. I thought about crushing him to destroy the evidence. But the real evidence was now part of our memories. So what was the point of destroying it? Jimmy? It doesn't make sense. You knew, you should have known. You couldn't have chosen those underwear by accident. Could you? When did you know? When I looked at him, his poker face was gone. He had won and I had lost. Tears poured from his devastated eyes, and a deep loss was written on his face. I would never be able to get rid of the image of my husband sitting there for the rest of my life, and in that moment I wished it was short. He spoke, his voice now barely audible. I found out on Friday, but I wasn't 100% sure. I needed you to tell me for sure. As you got out of the shower to talk to me, I suddenly noticed a brand new pair of underwear hanging on the door hook. It was just a reflection in the mirrored closet, but I saw it. You always hang your clothes there when you're getting ready. It was in the package, and I wanted it to be in the package when I got home, but we both know it wasn't. I watched the doorbell footage of you leaving Friday night, noted the time, and carefully paused the video to see the part of your underwear where you turned around and kissed the camera. When you came back and did the same thing, you stood in front of the camera a little longer, long enough to see that you were wearing a different bra. So you changed. When you left, I called my sister to know what time you showed up at the club. It was almost 2 o'clock, which meant that 90 minutes of your time was unaccounted for. Thank you for telling me what you did for those 90 minutes. Up until that point, I was in the dark. I was trembling, but I had to ask the question, what now? Jimmy? Can you forgive me? Can we find a way forward? He looked at me with tears streaming from his eyes. I forgive you. I didn't let him finish. I jumped up and threw myself around his neck, kissing his cheek again and again, but stopping when I tried to kiss his lips. He didn't react at all. His expression was blank again, and the tears were still falling. I pulled away from him. I forgive you, Jade. For the first time it happened. I understand your pressure. I already knew that you weren't in the best state of mind during and after COVID. I talked to my sister. She has a friend whose wife was a nurse and died during COVID, a decent, attractive guy. Honestly, I was thinking of suggesting you set up modest time meetings if that would get you out of a dark place. As for all the other times you cheated on me, I can't forgive them, and I can't overlook them. I wanted to cry, but I had to take the little chance he gave me. Wait, Jimmy, you'd let me sleep with someone who cares. Really? You're offering more than I did when I was with Dan. I had an hour of non-stop hardcore sex, and yet you're suggesting that someone could do to me what you and I did. He walked across the room and picked up a vase. My vase, Jimmy. Don't you know what that vase means to me? I know, Jade. I don't want to do anything, but look at it. I remember how proud you were of it at school when you made it. I remember how she showed up in her senior year and showed that there were talented people in the school. We both fell in love with her. I'm not going to, but suppose I threw her against the wall and she shattered into thousands of pieces. Suppose we spent a year looking for each tiny fragment until we were sure we had all the pieces, and then carefully glued it back together. Would you still want to put it in a prominent place in our house? Would it still be the same? On the other hand, what if we both agreed to lend it to someone who would appreciate it? Would they return it intact? I knew where this conversation was going, but I had to move on. I could barely whisper an answer. No, Jimmy, it would be obvious that it had been glued together. It would look similar, but it wouldn't be the same. But if we lent it to someone, they would take care of it and return it safely. As I broke down and sobbed uncontrollably, I realized what it was all about. Our marriage was the equivalent of that vase broken into all those shards. Jimmy would never see it as a mended vase until it was repaired. The vase would never be the same. Our marriage would never be the same. If we had borrowed it, and by that he meant agreeing to some kind of relationship with someone else while he was away, our marriage would probably be intact as well. So what? I've already packed a few bags and talked to my sister about staying with her. You're staying here. You've been a brilliant real estate agent, so get on with selling this house, unless you don't need it and can't pay the mortgage to keep it. I want to be honest. We don't have kids, so it's 50-50 or something. Before I go, would you be okay with that? I wanted to scream and yell that it wasn't fair, that I didn't want him to leave, but I knew my husband. He would never see our marriage in the same light, and it would fall apart. I didn't sob. I held back, but the tears streamed down my cheeks like two rivers. He went upstairs and came down with 2 suitcases. He came over, and when the sobs started again, he hugged me tightly, and I realized that was the way my husband would never hug me again. I could barely speak if I could condemn myself to an eternity in hell to hold you. I would, but I know I can't. If it means anything. I'm truly sorry for what I did to make these things happen. Watching you for the last hour was punishment enough in my eyes, but you lost something that was dear to both of us. I pray you can come to terms with that." Then he left and I sat on the floor with the front door open and watched his car drive away from the house, probably never to return. I wanted to run into the kitchen and slit my wrists, but that would have been the easy way out for me, and I would have punished Jimmy even more than I already had in April 2024. I took my goddaughter Amy in my arms and dedicated my life to her. She was so tiny and helpless, and I was grateful for the opportunity. After Jimmy left me, I didn't realize that he had tendered his resignation. I later learned that he planned to find some local work if his suspicions turned out to be unfounded. If not, he planned to go overseas. Finally, after he left me, 4 weeks later, he ended up in the USA. When I found out, I couldn't handle it, but Jimmy asked his sister Beth to use my circle of friends to rally around me, and they managed to help me stay afloat. The house was sold pretty quickly, and up until that point Jimmy continued to pay the bills, and even paid me some money to tide me over until the house was sold. I never contested the divorce, and 6 months later our marriage was just a statistic on the list of divorce cases in the UK. At this point, I wrote a letter which I gave to his sister to pass on to Jimmy. It didn't seem right to send a text message expressing my sadness and regret that I had done this to him. He didn't deserve it. To my surprise, I received a reply, although no address was given. He accepted my apology and apologized himself for testing me when he tricked me into confessing to the affair. He also apologized for not being there for me when I needed him, and if he could go back in time, he would have left the Riggs to be with me instead of leaving me. Knowing that I was depressed, he said that he had to take some of the responsibility for what happened. That made me burst into tears, which was typical of Jimmy. I left Yorkshire, got a job in an estate agency in South London, and rented a flat in Greenwich. It was hard to make such a drastic change, and I was about to give up when I found a man I had fallen in love with, and who loved me back. I was asked to look at a house that the owner was putting on the market, and I met Jerry, a quiet man in his 40s. It was an extraordinary, beautiful 4-bedroom single-family home in Beckley that would fetch a tidy sum. The house was completely empty, and when we reached the master bedroom, he broke down and sobbed heartily. I held him close and promised him that everything would be all right. It turned out that his wife had died of cancer 6 months earlier. He had moved out, but knew he had to sell the house, and this was the first time he had set foot in that house. Needless to say, love blossomed. I am happily in a new marriage. I have an adopted son, although he is in his 20s. I was surprised to get a message from Jimmy. He had remarried in America and had a daughter, Amy. I was hurt that he now had what I couldn't give him in a child, but at the same time, I was happy that he had what he was willing to give up when he was married to me. He spoke to his wife, Cassie, who agreed in principle that I should be Amy's godmother. Jimmy was in the UK and came to visit Jerry and me in Canterbury, near the cricket ground. Jerry's son was at the university there, and we both liked the area. Plus, it was close to the coast, which we had come to love. When the doorbell rang, I trembled, not knowing what to expect. It was the first time I would be face to face with my ex-husband since the day he left our home. I walked to the door with Jerry, and he kissed me and told me that we were going to be okay. He held my hand tightly. I wanted to cry but knew I shouldn't because when I opened the door, I saw a tan Jimmy with a woman who looked at least 10 years younger than him holding a little bundle named Amy. We escorted them into the house and began to get acquainted. Cassie was cautious at first, but I think she quickly sensed that I was happy with my life, and within an hour we were like old friends. I knew Jimmy and Jerry wouldn't be a problem. They had similar personality traits, although as I became more intimate with Jerry as our relationship progressed, he was somewhere between Jimmy and Dan in the way he treated me in the bedroom. For a man who didn't deserve a second chance, I promised myself I would never stumble in my relationship. I went so far as to get a tattoo, which I had never done before, on my upper left thigh. It was a small scroll that read. Above the top of the scroll was Jerry, and just below it was Jade. After lunch, I talked to Jimmy and thanked him and apologized again. He smiled and said that in the end things had worked out well for both of us. I couldn't have children, and Jimmy had accepted that our relationship would be like that, and having Amy and meeting Cassie was a big plus. He asked me what happened with Dan, why I didn't continue that relationship. We didn't have a normal relationship, Jimmy. It was just quick sex on those Fridays, nothing more, nothing less. Neither of us gave a damn about the other. After you left and he found out, he dropped me like a stone. Not that I would have come back. The thing that turned him on the most was that I was married. I know you were ready to get a divorce under the pretense that we were just estranged, but I told everyone everything, even though you already know from your sister. Rumors spread on local social media that he was a homewrecker with no morals. When another woman told the same story in front of COVID, his clientele dropped dramatically and the club closed. After that, he just disappeared. As I finished my sentence, I saw that Jimmy was distracted for a moment. I remembered the day he looked away from me during that fateful video call when he saw the reflection of my underwear in the mirrored glass. But this was different. He walked over to the mantel and picked up what he thought was a paperweight, but he, and only he, besides me, knew exactly what it was by the time Jerry came up. It's a strange piece of jewelry, but Jade says it's as important as her vase and important to us. She touches it every morning when she gets up, and before we go to bed, she tells me it's what will cement our love forever. But I still don't understand why someone would put a cheap digital recorder in a block of clear acrylic to make a paperweight. Jimmy smiled and cast a mischievous glance at Jade, who was doing the same thing, proof that she had learned her lesson. Never stop loving a good person, even for a second.